So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to CAMETH BRIN, a rather intimidating spire of rock with a village around it as a siege map. It's going to be an interesting one as well, I think, because this map in general, I have shown it once before, I believe, but the outer area is a little bit more exposed for a siege map, of course, so that generally will favour the attackers, but of course, as we work our way backwards, when, presumably, a final stand could take place here on the ruins atop the hill itself, that's obviously going to favour the defenders, because that's a very difficult place to try and take, especially if they fall back with a lot of their troops. But I imagine from a sporting sense of the word, they probably won't do that too early, or at least we can hope. This is also a match with, sadly, no unified theme. It's a bit of a mess with regards to the factions that are involved, so much so that I can't even craft a viable narrative to go along with this battle. So unfortunately that will be how it is. I've noticed actually there has been a far less themed battles that I've been getting ever since the new patch really arrived. I've had to be a little bit more sort of choosy with the battles that I've used to try and get those unified themes, because it is what people ultimately like watching. I don't actually have too much of a problem with battles like this, but in terms of what does better on the channel, the battles with themes do end up doing better, so that's the reason. I'm not complaining about the battles themselves not having themes. It's just what people want to see more of, yeah, that's why I'm mentioning it. And it does seem like in the latest patch people are less concerned with that, and it's more just sort of a free-for-all of whatever faction you want to be, and it's sort of, you know, it's for the game entirely rather than any sort of theme that they're having along with it. So that's kind of an interesting thing to consider. But regardless, it's probably nothing. I'm probably just talking nonsense. So, we'll go through the attacking armies first of all, starting off with the Blue Trauma - Grimsby. I'll call him Blue Trauma. And he's going to be playing as my beloved Erebor, and he has got some Iron for Axe Throwers. Very useful actually in a siege, whether on the attack or the defence, because you can deal with phalanx units very, very effectively with the Iron for Axe Throwers in general, and of course, as with most of Erebor's rather deadly skirmishes that they can use, skirmishing with them is very difficult because they're shielded and armoured to an extent which makes regular arrows have not as devastating an effect as you would want them to, considering the amount of damage they can do. So there is a certain air of inevitability with the amount of damage that Erebor's skirmishers can do, their crossbows and their axe throwers, of course. Yeah, and I think, honestly, I will say again, I think the lack of archers isn't enough of a downside to their skirmishers, because they can wade through arrow fire easily enough and get into range where their skirmishers can do far more damage than basic archers can do. That is something I will say until I'm blue in the face. The Erebor, the way that Erebor go about their business is not necessarily overpowered, but it is very, very easy to do. And that's part of the reason why I'm never really going to be their biggest fan, I think, which is a bit of a shame, because I do like the dwarven aesthetic quite a lot. Ironfoot pikes, unshielded but still heavily armoured. If they can get their phalanx down, they'll be very effective, especially against factions that don't have their own pikes. We have the Ironfoot halberds as well. Less range, you can see that from the weapons themselves, of course, but armour piercing, and also, if their formation is compromised, halberds do a better job at defending themselves in closer melee than pikes do, who are kind of useless in close melee, to be honest with you, unless you get up to the really, really expensive ones. More Ironfoot pikes. We have some Ironfoot warriors over here on the flank, some Ironfoot crossbows, so interesting enough, a pike and shot style army this, with a lot of phalanx units and a full array of skirmishers, which is kind of interesting. Some Ironfoot warriors without the armour upgrade just in behind here as well. What have we got going on back here? Some Merc cavalry to help secure the more open sections of the battle. Some Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin, so the armour piercing variant that the Dwarves of Erebor have for a General's Bodyguard unit. And they also have some Ironfoot Wargoats and some more mercenary cavalry, so a decent cavalry contingent as well to sort of secure the fast-moving stakes as well. I would say that if anyone were to sally out against this Erebor army, they'd be in for a really tough time, because so much of their army is made up of anti-cavalry units. They also have some good fast-moving options themselves, and of course crossbows and axe throwers will destroy them on the approach. Really, the only things you could go after would be the 2 units of Ironfoot warriors and the Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin, but you know, with only 3 units to protect, Erebor should be just fine in that regard. Moving on to the second attacking army, we have a Last Shadow who's playing as Rhudaur. He's got some Dunman Spearmen, so very cheap of course, and That's what Rhudaur can do. They are a faction which is very capable of fielding a lot of numbers, and the Dunman units are the lowest tier that they can field, so it makes sense that they're here. They'll just be sort of filling the role of just being fodder in this battle, I think, with a defence such as the one they will face in CAMETH BRIN. He's actually got some units closer to the entrance to the settlement as well. Some Rhudaur pikemen and some Dunman pikemen, so the basic pikes and the slightly fancier ones with the shields, of course. I'm a big fan of the Rhudaur pikes. I think they're a really, really good unit. They always seem to punch above their weight from a cost perspective as well, which is always nice. A few units of Rhudaur swordsmen, a mainstay in the Rhudaur army regardless of what sort of battle you're in. They may not have some of the fancier damage values that some of the other Rhudaur units can have, nor are they armour piercing like a lot of their roster. But this is a nice unit that you can have at the centre of your army, fairly numerous. They're not exactly the highest quality unit, but neither are they the lowest. They will outperform similar orc units, which is a nice thing for Rhudaur to have, to be honest with you. Over here, some Ettenmoor's Troll Hunters, so of course heavily armoured by Rhudaur standards, and of course those Javelins, which is the main event when it comes to playing as Rhudaur. If you don't like using those Javelins and Axe Throwers, then you won't like playing as Rhudaur all that much, because it is their main strength. There's probably a hidden unit over here as well. I'd imagine there are Rhanadyne Rangers and Trollshore Axe Throwers around here somewhere. And also the Witch Realm Enslavers and the Rhanadyne Berserkers, the two higher tier infantry units that Rhudaur have. One, of course, all about that big armour-piercing damage in melee. The other one adds in a ranged attack before also offering that nice damage up close and personal. But a lot of Rhudaur's army probably hidden. Over here, we have Blue Ranger, who's going to be playing as Lothlorien. He has got 3 units of Blades of the Wood. Basic elven infantry units like this are really, really efficient in melee. The issue with a unit like the Blades of the Wood, of course, is they don't have a lot of armour, so in a situation like this, where they're being asked to take a hill, effectively, enemy skirmishes can prove to be a real issue against the Blades of the Wood, because their armour values are pretty poor, and that is the way to really take away the elven value. And that's not just for Lothlorien, that's for really all of the elven factions, possibly with the exception, I'd say actually not even with the exception of Imladris, because they're the Swords of Rivendell, even with an armour upgrade, don't have huge armour values. They're maybe a little bit better at taking punishment in that way than the other 3, but it's still present, and it's one of the ways that you can actually deal with this kind of elven unit. But do take care, because if you do allow them to close in on you, they can really get a lot of good value. The heavier elven units, of course, are going to be a little bit less susceptible to that sort of tactic. Of course, Lorenan spears, obviously very good at what they do. Spears not necessarily the best at dealing damage, and that's true even for the heavier elven variants like this. But they're really, really good at keeping themselves alive, and honestly, against basic units, they are very capable of racking up a decent kill count for themselves. It's really against the elites where the spear malice starts to mean that they do their killing a lot more slowly. But just in behind, Lorien don't exactly want for options to do their killing more quickly. The Lorenan Axemen, of course, the heavier variant of line infantry that Lorien have, and in comparison to the other elves, of course, the main difference is the fact that they wield that axe, which means they trade in a bit of melee defense for a bit of melee attack. So they're going to be better at dealing out the damage than something like the Imladris Guardians, or at least, relative to their cost, they're going to be better at dealing out the damage than something like the Hirialt or the Imladris Guardians or something like that. But do take care, because they may not have quite the same staying power as those units. Lorenan Warriors as well, another thing that Lothlorien have that the other elven factions don't, a dedicated heavy axeman unit for that armor piercing. Mirkwood do have similar units, but they're hybridized with archers, so it's not like you can use them in quite the same role as the Lorenan Warriors, but should be useful here because there are some heavily armoured units on the defence. Some Watchers of the Goldenwood with their Silver Thorns, the Karos Galadhon's Guardians, multiple HP pikes, of course, very, very strong. In the late game, if they're still alive, it spells doom for the defenders, really, because you really need to deal with them with ranged units if you want to take them on. And then some Lorenan Archers and some Woodland Protectors, so some heavy archers and some javelins crossed with spears. Obviously nice hybridization there. And I'd imagine, based on this army, I mean, he spent a lot on his heavier units, which I actually do agree with in a siege like this. I think the heavier Lorien units will serve you quite well. I'd be surprised if I didn't see the Cairn Amroth Rangers pop out at some point, though. And then finally, we have Khand, played by Bop Tenter. And he has got some Glory Seekers over here. We haven't actually seen these at all, I think. I have used them myself before, but they are an incredibly cheap unit of cavalry. They are essentially fodder cavalry, which you can throw in to break up a charge, really just get in and amongst the enemy to make life a lot more difficult for them, because they actually do have decent morale for what they are. I don't believe they're unbreakable, which would make them really, really annoying, to be honest with you, but their morale is still decent enough to the point where they won't break instantly, like fodder may do. An interesting kind of unit. I think they're a little bit more useful in sort of more open maps than this, I would say. If you can get them up onto that plateau around CAMETH BRIN and start getting them in amongst the archers, they could be useful, but it's unlikely the defenders will allow you to do that. They'll probably bank up on the hills pretty efficiently, I would imagine. We also have some Variag horse archers, so some standard horse archers. Unsurprising to see Khand with some cavalry at least to help lock down the outer reaches. Combined with Erebor on the other side, they should be just fine with just those units, to be honest with you. I doubt the defenders are going to sally out too much. Nomadic raiders, so some basic, cheaper archers. Considering the quality of skirmishes that the elves and the dwarves can bring, I think it's fine for Khand and Rhudaur to go for a more numbers-focused skirmish approach, but I think actually only Khand has. We've also got some nomadic infantry over here, which are very similar actually to something along the lines of the Bardian marksmen from Dale, albeit slightly worse, I would suggest, considering their armour is not quite as good. But still a unit that can be used in a very similar way, in the sense that they are very resilient in a skirmish fight and also pretty decent in melee. So a nice hybrid unit. Nurad footmen as well, so this is obviously a really nice mainstay of the Khandish line. A unit of line infantry with a big shield value and armour piercing damage in melee. If you're up against the non-armoured faction, they can be obviously a lot less efficient. They're very similar in those ways to the flag rim from Rhun, but actually I think I prefer the Nurad footmen, maybe slightly, just because of their huge shield value, which makes them a little bit more resilient to arrows in a general sense. Very useful in a battle like this anyway. Nurad halberds, obviously again, halberdiers, very simple in what they offer. A lot of Variag warriors. They're cheap as far as heavy swordsmen go, and that obviously means they're not going to be quite as good as other offerings, but that cheapness is pretty good when it comes to getting good value off them, as long as you can get them into melee. Brotherhood of the Sword, Brotherhood of the Axe, the Brotherhood of the Spear with their new and improved spear model, which is almost like a Japanese Yari, much better than the version they had before, and of course some basic nomadic axemen, so some cheap AP into the mix as well. Now then, moving on to the first of the defenders, with Doge playing as Gondor. He's got some Mithrandir's retinue. They would do well, I think, to actually not be too gung-ho down here. They are probably actually the single strongest cavalry unit we've seen up until this point. But it's going to be an interesting tussle for them to try and get some good action down here on the low ground. Fully upgraded Gondorian infantry, some Fountain Guard, some Marksmen of Care Andros are in there. Of course, the Athelian Rangers are here, as well as the Wands of Minas Ithil, who are not body piercing, they are armour piercing, so they actually bear more in common with something like the Blackshot Dragon Slayers than the Athelian Rangers. Of course, the main difference being they're not quite as good as the other armour piercing archers, I don't think, because they're not quite as strong in melee, and nor are they as heavily armoured as any of their peers. But the main attraction with an armour-piercing archer is their ranged prowess, of course, so it's not actually as much of a crippling thing as you might think it would be. So actually it's a very good tool for Gondor to have. Veterans, Pelagia Marines, more Gondor infantry, obviously the Guards of Osgiliath are here, Wardens of the White Tower, and some Lothloriens as well. So yeah, pretty much what you'd expect from Gondor. Lots of really nasty stuff. The only thing that I would say is probably missing from this that you might normally see would be the Citadel Guard, I think, which we didn't actually see any of. But they have the Fountain Guard, so no huge gaps in this roster, I don't think. And I did mention actually in my tier list that if you had to make a choice between the two, I'd probably go for the Fountain Guard more often than not, especially in a situation like this where it's kind of unlikely that the attackers are going to be able to skirmish them as efficiently as they would like. We'll have to wait and see though. The player who sent me the battle replay was Hrothgar Heavenlight, and he is the one that is up here in the centre of the plateau starting, and he's playing as Dale, so another faction which is very comfortable in a long-range skirmish. Kelton River Patrol here, so some cheap jabbies. Athala Rangers are in there as well, again completely unsurprising to see them included. Upgraded Bardian Marksmen, very, very good in a skirmish fight indeed, which will be very useful against the likes of Lothlorien here, should they choose to engage in that manner, as well as the upgraded Dalian Bowmen, of course. Two units which should give Dale the comfort of being able to skirmish with whomever they choose. We have the Swordmaster of Esgaroth over here as well, which should be decent at facing down especially the offerings from Khand and Rhudaur, and they will at least not get slaughtered by the elves in the same way as something like these lumbermen will, but the armour piercing of course could prove useful in other ways. Barding Herd, I actually saw a comment which said, I wish the Barding Herd looked more Dalian. Well, they do look Dalian. It's kind of a little bit confusing to me why someone would not think they do. I think the style of Dale to have that lamella armour, sort of again be bulkier in general because of their close proximity and relationship to the dwarves, makes a good deal of sense. Barding Herd have also remained unchanged ever since Vanilla Third Age. I guess maybe they think that the movie style of the Dalian troops, like the Swordmasters of Esgaroth and the Dalian Bowmen, are what Dale's style should generally be. But I mean, when it comes to the Hobbit movies, there's a good deal of debate there, I suppose. Obviously with the Mirkwood and Erebor style as well as the Dalian one. But regardless, we won't open that particular can of worms here, but I just found it kind of strange that someone didn't think that the Barding Herd did look quintessentially Dalian in their style. It was a little bit odd to me. Regardless, Earls of Dale are over here as well, obviously the nobility of Dale, and they are obviously in a line infantry sense they are expensive, but that obviously translates into the fact that they are going to be very good at helping to hold the line, especially in conjunction with something like the Barding Herd. It's a very efficient front line. And back over here we have the Blackshot Dragon Slayers and the Dalian Royal Guard, so a lot of ranged pressure coming from those two units, a lot of armour-piercing missiles, and obviously the Dalian Royal Guard effective in melee and at range, and obviously very heavily armoured to boot. And then the final army on display today, we have Rhun, played by High King Gil-galad, and obviously the Easterlings here, a lot of their golden boys are out in force. Loke Scion Rim, Flag Rim, considering they're up against Erebor, that armour piercing is going to be really useful, and the Scion Rim should really help hold the line with their much better defensive values. And then obviously we have the Gamp Rim as well, so the Gamp Rim, more armour piercing. They need to be a little bit careful about engaging the Ironfoot Pikes, however, and also being shot by the Axe Throwers and the Crossbows. And that may be the main problem for Rhun here. They have the tools in melee to give Erebor a fight, but Erebor have got a very awkward composition to fight in general, I think. Rhune's saving grace may be the fact that they are the defenders, so the attackers, the onus is on them to try and seize the initiative. Variag Mercenaries over here, good in a skirmish fight, as I've said. Against Erebor, the main problem will be that Erebor won't really skirmish at long range with a unit like this, so this is actually a matchup where the Nar Rim would actually probably be better than the Variag Mercenaries, and they have been brought. And there is also a unit of Eastron Crossbows over here, albeit they obviously are not on the same level as the offerings from Erebor at all. And he does have the Carmel's Dragon Knight, so this definitely takes the prize as being the single most powerful cavalry unit on display today. But Erebor have got all the tools necessary to deal with a single lone unit of riders. And then back over here we have some Carmel's Chosen, some more Scion Rim with some Shadow Guard mixed in there as well, some Clansmen, and a couple of units of Baltroth Tribesmen as well, some Shadow Bows mixed in. So again, another unit of Rangers. All three defending armies bringing their Rangers, which of course is a bit of a given, to be honest with you. But without further ado, let's begin. So this should be an interesting one, I think, because it is a very mixed map for the defenders. I think the early phases of the battle favour the attackers, but as the battle wears on, the settlement gets more and more difficult to overcome with sheer might. But of course, if you gain an advantage in the early game as the attackers, the defenders have one hell of a job in trying to wrest that back away from you. So, I think one thing they definitely have in their favour is the fact that Dale are very comfortable at skirmishing, as are Gondor. Rhun maybe slightly less so, but considering they're going up against Erebor, that is actually less of a concern anyway. The one thing that I would say, which maybe works against Dale a little bit, is you can see here the Keren Amroth Staff Masters from Lothlorien revealing themselves, and they're actually going to scurry back down the hill, having deployed up on the plateau. If Dale decide that what they want to do is hold these two hills at the front, that obviously means they're going to have to hold back the two armies, rather than Gondor and Rhun, who will only have to hold back one apiece. Which obviously means Dale would definitely be the first to break, especially considering the very varied armies that Rhudaur and Lothlorien are likely to bring. You know, both of them offset one another quite nicely. Quality versus quantity, obviously. Lothlorien bringing the quality. Rhudaur more than capable of bringing the quantity. Rhudaur, of course, have a much higher selection of javelins and hand-thrown projectiles, whereas Lothlorien obviously are all about their bowmen. And they do offset one another really rather nicely. And so that obviously brings about a bit of a problem when it comes to trying to use a unified approach for dealing with both, because what works against one probably won't work against the other. So they're going to need a little bit of support, I think, from their allies. I think Gondor in particular, because they're nearer. And if I were to try and single out a single faction here, I'd probably go for Erebor. So I'd allow Rhun to sort of put all they had into trying to deal with the forces from the Lonely Mountain. I couldn't help but notice as well that already they are taking up position on this hill, but I don't know if they're going to retreat all the way to the top. I would advise against it, to be honest with you, if I were Hrothgar. I think he can actually get much more value if he decides to set his archers up along the rim of this path here. So when the enemies start to advance through the roads that lead through this village here on this plateau, he can get a lot of good value off there, from his rangers and from his armor-piercing archers, and just from his standard archers, to be honest. But time will tell. I mean, he is definitely going to be help defending from the front here. So the archers up on that hill, I do hope he doesn't retreat them all the way to the top of the hill. That would indicate an element of cowardice, but let's hope that's not the case. Khan, meanwhile, marching through the farmland. It's an interesting army from Khan in this as well. They actually have some decent numbers to them also. Good amount of AP. Quite a few units that are unshielded as well, though, which probably will play into Gondor's hands at least a little bit. Over on the other side, Erebor probing with the cavalry, but I think Erebor, like, they might actually regret bringing that much cav, to be honest with you, because while it does kind of prevent any sort of sally out from Gondor and Rhun being all that comfortable, it does mean that as the battle goes along, where cavalry becomes sort of less and less of a factor, where the battle gets narrower and it's all about the infantry, won't be all that useful to have mercenary cavalry still making up a section of your army. Meanwhile, over here at the front, Dale marching into position. It's a little bit of a thin defence over here, I have to say, that they're putting up against Lothlorien. I mean, yes, Earls of Dale and Barding Herd are strong, but only one unit of each facing down an entire army from Lothlorien, archers and javelin support or no. That's not going to be enough, I don't think. Daly and Bowman over here, who have got a good shot on Rhudaur as they approach. River Patrol over here as well. But yeah, it's going to be, and he is doing that, I'm glad that Hrothgar has set up his archers there, because that, I think, is the best choice. He's got a really nice shot onto Rhudaur. I think Rhudaur, to be honest with you, are shaping up to be the ones of the attackers that are going to have probably the hardest time. I think if the attackers are going to seize the initiative well, I think actually the faction to do that could be Blue Ranger and Lothlorien. I think Dale have maybe undercooked their defence a little bit over here, and against an Elven faction, that is a dangerous game to play indeed. Back over here, Gondorian infantry. I mean, I think Gondor will be just fine against Khan, to be honest with you. Yes, the AP that Khan can offer could be a bit of a problem against Gondor, but considering the defensive position that Gondor have, and considering the amount of unshielded units in the Khandish roster, I think they should be just fine. The Glory Seekers over here acting as a bit of a screen, making it so Gondor can't march down the hill, but I doubt that was ever going to be on the menu for Gondor to do here. Gondor are very much at home when they can dig in, form solid battle lines and support them with their archers. You don't need to give Gondor an excuse to be a little bit more reactive in their approach. Erebor slowly marching their way over here. I don't think Erebor need to be too concerned about the Variag mercenaries or the Nar Rim. They do have a lot of unshielded units, I suppose. The downside to bringing an army like that is there is a period between you getting your shorter range skirmishes into range of the enemy and being in melee, where the archers can really start to do some damage, especially seeing as Erebor haven't brought all that much in the way of shielded units. Essenmore's Troll Hunters moving forward, so this could be the first salvos in this fight, and indeed it is. Last Shadow moving his Essenmore's Troll Hunters up, not allowing Dale to just sit atop that hill in all that comfortable a fashion. That was, I think, a blank fire, so he's not going to have expended any ammunition there, and he is going to be able to pull back. I mean, that is the thing about facing Rhudaur. They are a very dangerous foe to fight, because one minute you can be handling their lower quality infantry very, very easily, and the next, their axe throwers and their javelins could have fired a unified volley and devastated a section of your army. Bardi and Marksman thinking of firing there, and they actually did get a couple of volleys off into the Blades of the Wood. Obviously quite a vulnerable unit, but also the cheapest unit in Lothlorien's roster. And in an Elven army, the cheapest unit is still like a decent chunk of change, of course, but still, Lothlorien will mind losing that unit the least, but they still can't afford to just sort of sit there and take damage all day long. Interesting to see Khan splitting their army. I'd imagine back here is where, yeah, you can see back here, this is where all of their unshielded stuff is, waiting for later, which is definitely the way to go. If I were Khan, I would send up the Brotherhood of the Spear, supporting the Nurad footmen actually, with all of the archers, because if you just have archers over here, I mean, it is... I suppose the advantage Khan have here is they do have this cavalry that they don't really mind losing, so they can get that in the way of anything that counter charges down the hill into these archers. Nomadic infantry firing, it is a really difficult angle for Khan to have to work with over here, but it is still one that they can try to make happen for themselves. Firing into the front of fully upgraded Gondor infantry is not likely going to result in all that many casualties, but it might very well. I mean, you can see here the marksmen of Caer Andros are firing. So it is coaxing Gondor into using some of their valuable ammunition, which could be better placed going up against some of the unshielded units later. If I were Gondor, I'd probably try to hold my nerve. I'd probably return fire with one unit of archers, but not all of them, and just try and weather the storm, because later is when Gondor's archers could really make a huge amount of value for themselves against the stuff like the Variag warriors and the nomadic axemen. Not exactly the most dangerous units, but hugely vulnerable to arrow fire, and it takes away a good amount of the manpower that the attackers will have. Dalian bowmen firing point blank here into the front of the Attenmore's troll hunters, who are decently armoured, but they're just sort of stood here taking it, which is a little bit odd, to be honest with you. I'm a little bit surprised that Last Shadow isn't pulling these troll hunters back, and Dale now maybe taking advantage of Last Shadow's dithering as the lumbermen start to charge down the hill, but think better of it when the troll hunters start to retreat and the Rhudaur pikemen move forward. Rhudaur pikes should actually do quite well in this situation. They are shielded after all, or I say well, they'll do better than most pikes at just being shot for little return. Rhudaur do need to be a little bit careful here, like their reinforcements are a little bit far. For Rodrum javelins, they're a unit which has revealed themselves. Lumbermen charging in, interestingly enough. Now, in a melee fight, of course, the lumbermen are not going to achieve all that much against Rhudaur pikes, but they are getting shot by the Dalian bowmen, so I actually think as a trade this probably works out quite well for Dale. Their lumbermen probably wouldn't have been that useful for much else, if we're being brutally honest with ourselves. I think I preferred the old Dalian lumberman model, to be honest with you. The green one that looked like they had like a bunch of equipment that they were taking out into the forest to do some logging. This one is one they share with the Erin-born axemen from Cardland. In come the Barding Herd, so another unit of phalanx. They're not as long range as the pikes, but they will get into melee here against the Rhudaur axemen. Rhudaur axemen very vulnerable to arrow fire potentially, but we shall wait and see how that fight progresses. I mean, fighting uphill like this is going to be difficult for Rhudaur, but it's a balancing act for Dale. They want to try and deal with this as efficiently as possible, but if they don't commit enough, they're in danger of losing ground to Rhudaur here. There is a line of thought which says maybe allow Rhudaur up onto this high ground. Like the hill, the advantage a hill like this gives you is nice, but you know, the advantage archers in a position like that will give you is probably even better, to be honest with you. Keldon River Patrol firing away. Let's go and see what's happening over on this side. I'd imagine, yeah, it's still very much a skirmish. The Mithrandir's retinue charging down the hill to try and get at these exposed archers, but as I thought, you know, the cavalry is here and ready to block the way. Where are the Glory Seekers? Are they all dead already? Maybe they are. Regardless, the Variag horse archers are in the way. And this actually gives a nice shot for all the archers to shoot into the Mithrandir's retinue. Honestly, it's not the worst loss for Gondor, because I don't know how useful this unit is going to be as the battle wears on. In come the Brotherhood of the Spear as well, so Doge probably needs to get this unit out of here, and he does. Done some damage to the Variag horse archers, but like I said, like this... Oh, there are the Glory Seekers. Khand are in a position here where they can quite comfortably defend their skirmishes like this, but I don't know if Khand are actually going to gain all that much from their archers here. The best thing probably will actually be the lower ammunition that Gondor are going to have, because he has been baited very effectively into using most of his ammunition, and a lot of it hasn't even hit. Like, a lot of it has hit the dirt right in front of the Gondorian army. Meanwhile, Lothlorien preparing an assault on Dale as well. I think that Lothlorien probably should have done this a little bit sooner, to be honest with you. Rhudaur's already got their attack underway, it's in full swing. And you need a unified front here, because Dale is having to hold back you both. one of you may very well take losses, but the other one will start to make progress, and as soon as one domino falls, the rest will soon follow in a settlement like this, as you can start to wrap up the lines and hit the other defences of Gondor and Rhun from the rear. Lumberman, victory is a distinct possibility. And yeah, Dale have got the upper hand in this fight over here because of the range support they're getting. Some of the Rhudaur axemen are starting to try and filter their way through over here, but they're very depleted at this point and shaken. And a unit of basic pikes like this is not going to make too much of a difference in this fight, I don't think. I think Last Shadow is doing the right thing by squeezing some of these units through to engage the archers, but in order to do this effectively, he needs more units, more shielded units, to actually do the heavy lifting for him. Like the Rhudaur swordsmen should be the ones to be committed at this point, not the Dunman pikemen, who are going to make very easy prey for the Dalian archers as they get more of them into position there. Earls of Dale also blocking the push from the Rhudaur player. I mean, the Rhudaur player is not approaching this in a horrible way, but Dale has definitely got a nice, efficient engagement against him. So this means the onus is kind of on Lothlorien here to make something happen. And with Lorien spears, axemen, blades of the wood in here as well. I mean, up close and personal, the Earls should probably lose this fight in the long run. But 2 units of Bardian marksmen over here, forcing the Watchers of the Golden Wood back. The Loren-armed archers are here. I think Lothlorien, he's in a situation where he was hoping, I think, to use his quality and leverage it without taking too many losses himself. That's not going to happen in a situation like this, though. You need to be prepared to take losses here. They have a nice defensive position, Dale, and if you allow their archers to run roughshod over you, they are very, very difficult to dislodge. And so far, Lothlorien being a little bit too conservative considering the general situation, I think. Brotherhood of the Spear are being surrounded by all of this Gondor infantry who are beating them in a straight up melee fight. That wouldn't happen if it were just the one unit of Gondor infantry and the Brotherhood of the Spear were in a nice position to engage them. But the Brotherhood of the Spear are in a bad position, and it's 2 units of fully upgraded Gondor infantry doing the business. There's also a bit of support coming in from the Pelagian Marines, but this does expose the Gondor infantry to more direct fire from the archers, but that's not going to be too much of a concern for the Gondor infantry. They are perfectly comfortable under heavy archer fire with their full armour upgrades, with their good shields. An atrocious war like that is exactly the sort of thing that the Gondorians can definitely engage in. Back here, the runic defensive lines are being tested as well by the Ironfoot warriors. Of course, the Ironfoot axe throwers are coming in here as well, doing some good work. But actually, Variag mercenaries with a good angle of fire here, and they're actually doing a good job here against the Ironfoot axe throwers. I'm not sure what the mercenary cavalry was trying to accomplish. I mean, maybe they're trying to squeeze through, but that was never going to go all that well where Scion Rim are concerned, because they would have had to go through the Scion Rim to a certain extent, and that presumably resulted in their routing. There's a lot of dead Ironfoots over here. Another unit of mercenary cavalry is being committed forward here by Blue Trauma, and also all of these phalanx units are moving forward. Variag mercenaries doing some damage to them on the approach, and I mean, this is the kind of army I actually feel as though you need to be quite aggressive with it, I think, because you'll take losses the longer the battle is drawn out. Being aggressive with the crossbows and all of your axe throwers, I think, would have been the way to try and deal with that. The mercenary cavalry once again is trying to squeeze its way through. The axe throwers have actually turned their attention to the Variag mercenaries, which Rhun will be actually quite pleased with. The fact that the front line is not what's taking the damage from the axe throwers, and it is instead their archers, which are going to be able to absorb some of the damage with their shields. So the Variag mercenaries doing a good job here, and they will certainly hope that the axe throwers don't turn their attention onto the Gamp Rim, because the Gamp Rim could be super useful in a fight like this. Yeah, these mercenary cavalrymen are going to rout very, very quickly under the weight of Scion Rim and Gamp Rim squeezing in on them. But yeah, the armour piercing going to be useful here unless they can get some Ironfoot pikes on the front line to counteract this from Rhun. Gil-galad has actually done quite well here. Erebor's army is very stretched as well. You can see how distant some of the reinforcements are. They're only just arriving now, and that's part of the reason why Rhun have actually had a pretty good go of it so far in this fight. Meanwhile, the Gondorians continuing to push down the hill. You can see the nomadic infantry and the nomadic raiders starting to run out of ammunition, so they're charging forwards into melee against the Gondor infantry. Nomadic infantry won't do too badly in this fight, but the Gondor infantry is still going to be superior. It is their main focus after all. They're actually running low on skirmish ammunition at this point, I would imagine. Khan, they still have a few archer units firing away, but very depleted. Not exactly the sort of thing to turn a fight if it starts to go badly. Slowly but surely, is definitely the name of the game here for Khan. Meanwhile, from the front here, this token Lothlorien force that was sent forward, Blue Ranger. I've seen people make this mistake before, where they are... I feel as though this is what Blue Ranger is doing. He's fixated on the late game. He wants to have something left for the late game. Unfortunately for him, he's not going to have a late game if he continues to dribble units in one by one like this. In a situation like this, you either need to go to one of the two extremes. You either pull back completely and don't engage Dale at all, or you go all in and try and crack them. If I were Lothlorien, considering what Rhudaur is doing over on this front, I would go all in and try and crack them. Because over here, you can see actually with how Erebor have been really rather slow, Rhun have felt comfortable enough to send over reinforcements here to help deal with Rhudaur. And Rhudaur is having to deal with runic units, Dalian units, and Gondorian units. And it's not as if they're garbage either. Flag Rim, Fountain Guard, Wardens of the White Tower. I mean, Rhudaur is definitely the whipping boy here, and I come back to the fact that this being the case, Lorien need to be the ones to make something happen in a melee sense here, because there's no way Rhudaur are going to be able to do much here. Like, they are filtering themselves in, they are throwing themselves on the swords of their enemies. But to what end? Like, none of their allies are really taking advantage of this, and Lorien need to be the one to do that, really. Because they would be the ones to take advantage of the fact that the Dalian army is stretched. Khan sending forward more units now, and I think they kind of need to at this point. I think enough of the Gondorian archers have used their ammunition that their shock infantry, their nomadic axemen, and their Variag warriors are safe enough that they can now go in. And the nomadic axemen actually in this situation should be a fairly good unit to send in against the Gondor infantry, and the front line of Gondor is now being tested. Nurad footmen also moving in. Archers or no, they will be a good addition to Boktanta's attack. And to be honest with you, from this angle, the Gondorian archers don't actually have the best angle to shoot in anyway. Nomadic axemen, yeah, you can see this Gondorian front line is now routing. It's been overrun, so this is a good opportunity for Khan now. They need to flood up the hill. They need to engage. It's going to be bloody, but I think the situation being what it is on the battlefield, one of the attackers needs to do something to inject some sort of momentum into this assault, and Bokhtanta has the opportunity to do so now. A single unit of nomadic axemen charging into guards of Osgiliath will not do this. His whole army getting up the hill and doing some damage will. We shall see though. Let's see, Erebor meanwhile have definitely been bottled up quite effectively by Rhun. I think mainly it's just been poor use of certain assets. I think the crossbows, you know, the reinforcements have been so far away, so I can understand them not wanting to be shot by arrows, but the reinforcements are too far away to make that much of an impact over here, and Erebor, a bit of a wet noodle in this fight, it has to be said. I was going on about how Erebor is easy to play, and I stand by that, but in this I think it's just the fundamentals that have been a bit lacking. Meanwhile, Rhudaur sending forward more and more units to try and make something happen. I have a good amount of sympathy for Last Shadow, I think, in this situation, where he is continuing the assault. He is... No, he's putting pressure on, he's doing damage, he will ultimately be unsuccessful in his endeavours, but he is giving his allies ample opportunity to make something happen. Khan have got the opportunity to do that now, and we'll see what happens with him. But over here, the elves, I will give Blue Ranger this, the elves are, in this situation, more difficult to play than you would think on the attack. Because yes, they have the quality, yes, they're more than capable of dishing the damage in melee, but where the defenders can control the skirmish game like this, especially one that is as hard to dislodge as Dale, it can be a bit of a struggle. Having said that, I do still think he's been far too willing to keep a lot of his assets too far back. Yes, blobbing up would maybe make him a big target of rangers wherever they may be, javelins and the like, but you don't really have a choice in this situation. Like, if the choice is possibly break through the line or just slowly die, you're going to take the first option, aren't you? Which means you have to be a little bit more bold. You can't pull your punches. Over here, meanwhile, this is more like it from Khan. Gondor have squeezed forward with a lot of their stronger units now. Guards of Osgiliath defending from the front. More Gondor infantry and the Fountain Guard now shuffling forwards as well. But this is a little bit more substantial from Khand. I do think they need a few more in there. I think maybe having some Nurad halberds, while most of these units are pikes, I think they need something to shore themselves up, because they are in danger of having this whole attack fall apart. They do have the Brotherhood of the Axe in there as well. Thrandir's retinue are back there. Ithilien Rangers. So yeah, the Dalian army definitely taking losses, but that's to be expected. Ithilien Rangers have got a good angle of fire here, as well as the veterans of Osgiliath, so they should be able to get some good damage done, which means, again, the emphasis is on Khand, I think, to really push forward with some weight. That may be the overall theme in this battle, that the attackers, they didn't come forward in enough numbers to make something happen, but they didn't come forward in small enough numbers to make the wounds they were sustaining too minor to ignore, if that makes any sense. They've simultaneously not committed enough, but also committed too much. The halfway house, which is never where you want to be. We'll see if they can turn this fight around, though. The attackers always have a bit of an advantage in a siege like this when they have superior numbers. Ironfoot crossbows firing in. Are they going to fire into the shadow bows? I would imagine they probably are. I mean, definitely a dangerous foe, but some of the bolts they're hitting the grass verges. Again, cavalry. It's a bit of desperation, really, from Erebor, this, to try and smash through the front of Gamprim and Scion Rim with lance cavalry like that, especially when it is supported by rangers, javelins, and crossbows. A very brutal fight indeed. And I will give the attackers this. This is it's a tough settlement to get through, but I would say that the exposed nature, it's the sort of settlement where you'd at least expect the attackers to be able to force the defenders to resort to climbing CAMETH BRIN itself. We shall see that. Over there, though, I saw that. Wards of Minister Thiel, armour-piercing arrows. I mean, Khand, again, to give them their credit, they are pushing forwards, but they need to push forward simultaneously on every hill, the attacks, I think, because one or two of the armies will be savaged by doing that, but it allows the other two to then break through. And I think that's where the attacks have fallen down. Like, they haven't had a unified approach. Lothlorien have been more conservative. Now they have the opportunity, once again, like they've had the opportunity for a while, I think, to come forward in more numbers, but they're still got units there. Rhudaur and Khand are being hyper-aggressive. Erebor and Lothlorien have had that sort of conveyor belt approach, which I've never been the biggest fan of. Having reserves, yes, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do it, I think, and I think we've seen the wrong way advertised here. But you could also say that Rhudaur have been far too aggressive in this fight. Like, they've sent forward men, their whole army, when it was clear that their allies were not prepared to do the same. And so, as much as you can say, well, Lorien should have been more willing to do what Rhudaur did here, you could also say that Rhudaur should have cleared with Lorien first what they were going to do. Trollshire Axe is moving forward there with the Ferodrum Javelins. I mean, Rhudaur have maintained an assault of sorts here, but maybe longer than you would expect considering the huge amount of pressure they have come under. But yeah, ultimately a fruitless endeavour. Meanwhile, over here, Lorien should win this fight over here because more and more resources have been siphoned off, and again, that is quite telling. The fact that Dale have felt comfortable enough to not commit too many resources against Lothlorien of all factions. A faction which can be so dangerous in melee, because clearly they felt as if Lothlorien weren't going to be hyper-aggressive, and they were right. They were right. Khand, meanwhile, from the front, starting to fizzle out. The Gondorian line doing its thing. Some Swordmasters of Esgaroth helping them to finalise their victory over here. Brotherhood of the Sword moving forward, but again, at this point, I think Khand are in the same boat as Rhudaur. The only thing they can really do is keep this assault going for as long as they possibly can, and hope that Erebor or Lothlorien can break through. But Erebor were having a torrid time of it as well. Rhun have done a pretty good job, considering they didn't even use their entire army to block Erebor's progress. The Ironfoot Wall goes, the crossbows are moving forward. Some axe throws, yeah. Erebor's army has been absolutely devastated. Pike and shot didn't serve them all that well when fighting uphill into javelins, crossbows, rangers, and a solid easterling front line, it must be said, and charging uphill like that, you're not going to get a huge amount of momentum. And Rhun, very comfortable to let it happen anyway. Not the army for the situation. It's an intriguing army actually from Erebor. I feel as though there are situations in which the heavy pike and shot focus could work very well. This, however, in hindsight, was not one of them. Crossbows firing in, they are going to do the damage here, do the business to the Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin. And yeah, Rhun are going to be outright victorious over here. Erebor don't have any answers left, which is bad news bears for the attackers. Because Khand, there's no way are they going to be able to break through this Gondorian wall. They might do a little bit more damage, but that will be it. Skirmishes set up in nice positions, so yeah, not going to go too well for them. But from the front was always where the attackers, considering it was mainly just Dale facing off against two armies, this should have been where they did the business. Lothlorien may very well break through this front line eventually, but even that I'm actually not too convinced about now, because they've taken so long about it that now assets are being freed up from other front lines on the battlefield, and obviously Rhudaur. Victory seems certain for the Khazad-Dum pikes. That's kind of surprising. I mean, Flagrim are pushing forward maybe a little bit aggressively, but I wouldn't have thought that. Well, support coming from the Reforged javelins. They're getting shot up by the Athala Rangers, mind you. It's definitely been a bruising encounter, this, for the attackers, and I feel fairly confident in the fact at this point that I think the defenders are probably going to go on to win this. I think they simply have too much quality. I think even if the attackers break through in one area, it's not going to be enough to turn this around at this point. And the only front line I think they have any chance of doing so would be on the Lothlorien one, where the Karas-Galadhon's Guardians could grind it out. But they have enough there to keep that Lothlorien army at this point bottled up for as long as they choose. Khand and Erebor have been really devastated back here. I mean, you can see the Brotherhood of the Sword are fighting. Nomadic Raiders being thrown in come the Nurad Stormguard, but they're really damaged at this point as well. Tough encounter for Khand, but I think Khand, if they had taken on the role of doing this in service of their other allies making progress on other fronts, I don't think Bop-Tanta would have minded that, but as it is going to be in vain. Yeah, I think that much is clear. I think Erebor were the ones who actually put in the poorest performance. Part of that is the reinforcements being really far away. Part of it was the composition not being great. Another part of it, to be fair, was also the army just not being used all that effectively. Crossbows and axe throwers softening the enemy up while the warriors engaged, and then later the pikes can roll through. That probably would have been the best way to use that composition. But there, lances down from the Carmel's Dragon Knights, and at this point, when the Knights have managed to get free, if that spells do, Rhudaur General falls. Actually, a little bit surprised that the Erebor General wasn't the first to fall. Yeah, the Dragon Knights at this point. Going to be able to destroy the Ironfoot crossbows very, very nicely. Where are the Dragon Slayers? Or what's left of them? There they are. Very nice looking unit, very, very strong as well, but not enough to solo a whole army all by their lonesome. And the Dragon Knights, of course, are continuing to shave away at their support as well. Let's have a look over here. I think, yeah, this is... You can see here the collapse of the Rhudaur assault as soon as that general fell. And once again, really a token effort very late on to commit the Watch to the Golden Wood. When the battle is already lost, they've been committed effectively. I mean, there's not that much left over here, to be honest with you. Maybe the Watchers can do a lot of damage, but it will be, you know, a last stand. Nothing else really. Lorien Archer's also there. What about over here? Just trying to saturate the line now. Pelagia Marines being sent forward. So they're really just making sure that Lorien don't make the progress, even though it would be kind of fruitless at this point anyway. The Khan General falls, which I imagine means they will suffer the same fate as Rhudaur momentarily, where their morale collapses. Yeah, Variag warriors starting to run. Again, the Lorien warriors have been committed over here. It's a very puzzling move to do that. I mean, if you were going to do that, you should have committed them earlier when Khan had their whole army slamming into Gondor. To commit them now when Khan has already lost is a baffling decision from Blue Ranger, to be honest with you. It's one of those decisions where you can tell that he really wanted to have his army be the one left for the late game. and unfortunately for him, it has blown up in his face spectacularly. Because I do think his has been the most, like, Lorien and Erebor, considering the quality that they bring to an attacking force like this. These Dragon Knights have been devastated by the crossbows pretty effectively, even though the crossbows were wide open. Cycle charging into them, you can see how effective the crossbows can be at killing one of the strongest units of knights in the game. Again, just my own personal vendetta against that particular unit continues. But as I was saying, considering the quality that Lorien and Erebor bring, they did quite poorly in this battle, I think. I don't want to be too harsh, but Lorien were far too conservative, Erebor had their reinforcements too far away, and I think the composition ultimately, while it prevents any sort of sally out, the way that they sort of filtered their units in one by one into a very grateful runic defence was not all that well conceived either. I think for Rhudaur and Khand, I mean, this is, yes, they were a little bit gung-ho, but it's more in their wheelhouse to be such because they have much more in the way of numbers that they can throw into the enemy. So it makes sense for them to be the pawn sacrifice, as it were, but it needs to be an aid of the more quality-focused factions in Lorien and Erebor making ground, and they really made a bit of a pig's ear of that in this battle, to be honest with you. Lorien's willingness to reinforce certain areas of the battlefield after they had already been lost is also a very weird one. The Watchers of the Golden Wood may very well win this fight over here. Where are they, actually? Did they get pulled back out? There are the Shadow Guard. They can't have died that quickly, surely. There are the Athala Rangers. But yeah, definitely, when you're on the attack in a situation like this, I think the Elves are an interesting one to bring on the attack, to be honest with you, because you cannot play them like this and expect to have success. You need to be willing to take those losses. You need to force the defender's hands. Even if they focus you as Lothlorien down, this will allow Rhudaur and potentially Khand to force their way through with their brute force. And ultimately it will serve your team better than just loitering around waiting for something that's never going to happen. And I think that would be the big lesson in this battle today. Even though it's a lesson that has been repeated many times in many different siege battles. And it will never sink in, I don't think. For many. One can only hope, but yeah, the defender's definitely going to win here. They've been bled for it, as you would expect, but in the end, it was a map where the momentum, one of those where the momentum was always with one side, and in this case it was with the defenders. Ironfoot Crossbow is still one Dragon Knight, but they're being engaged in melee, and at this point the Scion Rim will finish off Blue Trauma's army. Compositions, I think Rhudaur and Khan's compositions were actually okay for the purpose they ended up serving. Khand actually kind of approached the battle in the way I would expect. Skirmish early, absorb some of that ammunition, later on send in your infantry. I think they maybe could have handled the initial assault into Gondor a little bit better. They were a little bit too stretched, and that allowed Gondor to gain the upper hand and start doing some pretty serious damage to some of the units before the main body of the army was actually there, which was a bit of a misplay. But that was more of a micro, that was like I say a micro issue, it was a macro thing really, but that was a singular issue. I will say again, I do think the main offender here was Lothlorien. I think the way that they approached the battle was incorrect fundamentally. Even if they ended up being cannon fodder by charging forward in greater numbers, it would have helped his allies far more, and it would have made the battle, I think, a lot more likely to tip in favour of the attackers at some stage. But in the end, it was not the choice that was made. Thala Rangers continuing to fire. There goes the Brandine Pikes. This is that announcer once again. He's going ham. He's going crazy. This is going to be the last pocket of resistance left standing. So I suppose in that sense, the Lothlorien player probably does have what he wants. He is the one left standing in the late game to carry the flag for his team, but ultimately it's going to be purely in the aid of defeat. Staff Master is going to prevent the full surround, but that isn't going to prevent ultimately the fate of Lothlorien being defeat here. Let's see. Gamprum over here. So yeah, Khan's army completely destroyed at this point. There's still some fighting. I mean, this is the thing. Erebor are very difficult to finish off once and for all. Especially when it comes to stuff like the Dragon Slayers over here. There's only 2 left at this stage. But the crossbows, I mean, yeah. They're like cockroaches, Erebor. They'll survive anything. Oh, come on now. He's not going to do this, is he? Run away with 3 units. Prolong the agony of his team. I assume he's going to admit defeat. In fact, I think there is going to be admit defeat generally here, because I don't actually think... Well, I mean, the Karos Galadhon's Guardians... They might get killed that quickly. I mean, they are pikes at the end of the day. Their hit points are probably gone at this stage. But I don't know, 300 frames. I think there is going to be a general order to admit defeat here. That's going to be Erebor gone. Lothlorien the only ones left then. And I think an admit defeat is going to come. But a well-deserved victory from the defenders. I think the way the attackers approached it was very splintered and broken. But the defenders did nothing wrong. And that's key, because in a situation like this, where if you're the defender and you make a mistake, obviously it's multiplied in comparison to that of ones that the attackers can make. Replay finished. So, unfortunate that we can't actually see the kills in this battle, which is kind of strange if I'm being honest. I wonder what the reason for that would be. But yeah, I think we can sort of read into what the kills would probably be. I'd imagine Dale probably had the most, just because they had to primarily focus 2 armies down. They did have support from their allies, but such as it was. I think Gondor would probably be then. I think Rhun would have the least amount of kills, purely because they were going up against primarily Erebor, who had a smaller army. But they didn't play any worse. I think kills are one of those things which you can feel good about yourself if you do get a lot of kills, but it's not really the be-all and end-all. You can read a lot into how they played, and I don't think any one defender played better than the others here, if I'm being honest with you. I think they all did their jobs well. And I think the attackers, very broken approach, very splintered, and that ultimately was what ended up deciding the battle here today. And so CAMETH BRIN, we didn't actually even see a final stand at the top like we did the last time we saw this map. The defenders fully focused on holding the plateau, and they managed to shore it up. And yeah, the perils are playing as the elves, I think, on the attack, and less so the dwarves. I think the dwarves, it was just a weird composition. I think Erebor are more than capable of being really dangerous on the attack if you go for more of their shielded infantry. But Lothlorien here, aside from the way they were played, the elves in general, you do need to be careful with them. I think in a siege, like, they are a very strong set of factions, but lower numbers means you can be focused down more easily. And if you're not willing to be aggressive, you're going to be more of a hindrance to your team than a help, which I think is fairly key going forward. So yeah, I would say that would be sort of the thing to take away from this. It's, as the attackers, you need a unified approach. If you're going to be more conservative, take a slower approach as a player, you need to make sure that your allies are doing the same thing, because otherwise you'll end up with a situation here where Rhudaur went in for an assault, but they were focused down with a lot of elite stuff because Lothlorien weren't willing to do the same. The other way around is also true. Like, if you're going to be aggressive, you need to clear with your allies that, or be clear with your allies that is what you are going to do, because they need to be, at the very least, they need to be more aggressive than Lothlorien were here in order for that to work. Composition's also key. The Erebor composition is one that I would actually be interested to see on a different kind of map. I think there are maps in which that composition could actually be really, really interesting to see. That pike and shot style. But in this situation, it was both misused and not really all that well thought out, to be honest with you. Because, again, I think Rhun dealt with it relatively easily. I think the runic player did so without breaking too much of a sweat, to be honest with you. He handled it very well. Khan, actually, I think, of all of the players on display today, actually played the battle best of all the attacks, I think. He skirmished early, got the Gondorian to, use up some of his ammunition in a place he didn't want to, and then he moved forward. I think he could have maybe sort of handled the assault a little bit better, perhaps. But the concept of what he was trying to do, at least, was okay. And even though he did end up dying, under most circumstances, I think that sort of assault would allow allies on other points of the battle to gain a bit of an upper hand. In this case, it didn't, because momentum was already with the defenders, and seizing it back was always going to be a bit more of a problem. But yeah, big thank you to Hrothgar Heavenlight for sending this battle to me. Big thank you to all of the players for being a part of this one. Nice to see CAMETH BRIN again. It's a map I've only shown once before, and it worked out differently that time as well. So yeah, as for what's going to be happening in the near future, obviously this will continue. I'm kind of in a little bit of a rut, to be honest with you, because I've sort of passed by the exam period. I know what I'm going to be doing in my summer semester now, to a certain extent anyway. I know what work I can be getting on with. And it's not going to be too intrusive, to be honest with you, so I can keep up my current schedule relatively easily, I think. But honestly, it's an interesting situation. It's almost the sort of topic which sort of warrants a channel update video, to be honest with you. And I think maybe that will be something that will happen at some stage. We'll see. I want to get involved with a couple of the Silmarillion events that are going on recently as well, if at all possible, if it lines up nicely, and maybe I can get involved there. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting one, really. I kind of expected to have a weight lifted off my shoulders from the end of the second semester, but instead it's just kind of a so I guess this is it, but yeah, I mean, it's just a little bit of funk, I suppose. It'll go away in time, and then I don't know. I mean, I will sort of carry on with the current schedule as it is. But yeah, I do think it's the sort of thing which does warrant a channel update video, to be honest with you, but I'll think about it. Regardless, the next video, I think that any sort of update video or sort of announcement will come sort of a week or so away from when this probably releases, if not further. So the video after this one will just be another battle replay, or possibly a tier list video, depending on what I'm feeling at the time. So yeah, it was an interesting battle, to say the least. It was, I don't know if it was within 10%, to be honest with you. No, it wasn't. It was kind of again, like this battle, I think maybe the player sent it to me because it made him look good. I really don't want to be too cynical in that way, but I mean, it was, the attackers didn't really play to that higher quality in this battle, if we're being brutally honest. The defenders didn't really need to be all that good. You know, they just handled it by the book. Yeah, again, you know, it's one of those things, I suppose. I don't know. I think I've rambled enough at the end of this video, to be honest with you. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this for what it was, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.